I think I can recreate this in Blender. Now, before I can recreate this shot from the new Dune 3 trailer, I need to learn how to do cloth simulation in Blender. As of now, I have zero experience creating clothes or using the cloth simulation in Blender. But before I can give this scene a try, I want to practice using the cloth simulation in two other scenes from the previous Dune movie. I picked this iconic scene of Paul Atreides from Dune 2. And for the other scene, I picked this scene of Baron Harkonnen floating upwards from Dune 1.
My Arrakis. Why Dune?
I think both of these scenes will be a good practice before I can try tackling the scene from Dune 3. So without a further ado, let's jump into Dune 1. I started off by bringing some reference image and trying to recreate the background object and the throne. Now, one thing that I found to be very helpful was breaking any object down into smaller bite-sized pieces rather than trying to recreate the whole object all at once. Also, for some of the background pieces where it requires a repeating object, I went ahead and used the array modifier for those. The array modifier helped me keep everything clean and organized. Instead of having to copy and paste a bunch of the same object, I could just use the array modifier for those. One other modifier that really helped me a lot during this project was the Boolean modifier. Now, if you don't know what the Boolean modifier is, here is a quick overview. Let's say I want to cut this shape out of this cube. I can go ahead and place it wherever I need, and then go to the modifier tab and select the Boolean modifier. Using the eyedropper tool to select the other shape and then pressing apply. And that's it. It's quite simple and easy to use. Now going back to the scene, this is what it looks like after I was done modeling the scene. It was now time to move on and bring in the character. So I hopped on to Cascadeur to create a quick animation. One thing that I did was have the character be in a T pose at first and then change into the pose for the scene. Having the character be in a T pose helps out tremendously later when I'm trying to work with the cloth simulation. Once I was done with the animation, I imported to Blender and then created the cloth simulation, which in theory is actually quite simple. And it goes like this. Create a dress. Under the physics tab, select cloth, scroll down and enable sewing, and that's it. Quite simple really, if it worked properly. But for some reason I kept on running into the same issue. Whenever the character starts levitating up, the sewing around the shoulders starts to rip apart. After struggling for days, I think I was able to find a solution. Instead of having the sewing on the shoulder, I kept it solid and in one piece. This helped prevent tearing near the shoulder. Now, there are still some issues with the cloth simulation in other parts, but for the most part, I think this project is about done. And without a further ado, here is the result for Dune 1 scene.
My Arrakis. Why Dune?
Now there are a lot of jank in the final result, but let's see if I can do better in the second scene from Dune 2. To start off, I brought in these rock models from Polyhaven, and I arranged them randomly to create the foreground and the background rocks. Also edited them to match closely to the reference image and to make sure it doesn't look repetitive. Along with that, I created a plane and then used the displace modifier to make it look more like a rocky plane. Jumping into the character animation, similar to what I did for Dune 1, I went to Cascadeur and created this little animation. Once I placed the character in the right position, I moved on and created the crowd on the ground plane. In order to do that, I first got this cutout of Paul and then duplicated a few times and changed the color of each one of them and put all of them in a collection. Then selecting the ground plane, I went to the particle system, clicked on hair, advance, and then scrolling all the way down to render and then selecting collection for render as tab. and finally selecting the crowd collection from the instance collection tab. And that's pretty much it. After that, I increased the number of people and then played around with the scale variation until I got the render to look as close to the original reference image as possible. Next, I brought in this model from Sketchfab in the hopes of being able to put these clothes onto my character. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the clothes to go along with the animation correctly. So instead, I pivoted and used the UV editor to place the textures from the new model onto my character, which I think it turned out pretty well. And last but not least, the cloth simulation. This was actually quite easy and straightforward. I just created an empty plane and then parented that to the neck bone. And then I used the hook modifier to attach the cloth simulation to the empty plane. And this allows the cloth simulation to follow the character animation quite nicely. One thing to note is to put the hook modifier at the top of all the other modifiers, including the cloth simulation, otherwise this won't work properly. And that was pretty much it for this scene, and here is the final result. Some of the cloth simulations are overlapping each other, but other than that, I think it turned out pretty good. Now moving on to the last scene from Dune 3. The first thing I did was create the dome and the circular structure surrounding it. I used the inset and the extrude tool to create the small detail on the circle. Next, using the boolean modifier, I cut out the hole in the dome and then copied it a few times to create the opening at the back. Moving on, after creating a pose in Cascadeur, I went ahead and brought that model in Blender. I also went ahead and downloaded this wedding dress from CG Traders, and then edited the dress to fit the character better, and then moved on to creating the cloth simulation. At this point, doing the cloth simulation was pretty straightforward. One other thing I did was add 3 different wind force to help make the cloth seem like it's flowing in the wind. And this really helped the scene look as close to the original as possible. Now that I have the cloth simulation done, the only thing left to do was add the texture for the dome. And this took me the longest time ever to figure out. If you want to follow along or know how I did this, here is the setup for the texture node. These are all of the textures I used in this project from Polyhaven. I'll put a link to all of them in the description down below, along with the link to any model I used throughout this project. Now, here is the quick overview of how I did the textures for the dome. First, I created the base rocky texture by plugging in 2 image texture, and this is the result of those 2 combined. Next, I used this image texture to create the rings. I combined the image with a wave texture and a Voronoi texture. I found that adding them to a math node and selecting the divide option was giving me the best result. Next, I added another image texture and plugged it into a bump node. I also plugged it into a math node, this time selecting the multiply option. This helped me combine this new image texture to the previous image textures, and then took everything together and plugged it into a mix shader node, mixing in the shader from the previous base rocky texture and the new ring texture. And last but not least, I plugged in an empty image texture to use as texture paint, where I used the paintbrush to take out some of the ring pattern. As you can see here, this is before without texture paint, and this is after texture paint. And that's pretty much it for texturing. This took me way too long to figure out. It's just plugging in different things to see if it works, and adjusting the size, scale, rotation, and many other factors. And finally, here is the final result of the Dune 3 scene. Overall, I think all 3 results are pretty good, and I definitely learned a lot about cloth simulation from these projects. Let me know what you guys think about the final results. Do you think they were good, or is there room for improvements? If so, let me know what they are in the comment section down below. And again, thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.